It's Phumlani Majosi, the author of Lessons from Past Heroes. This is the Phumlani Majosi show where we give you common sense on local and global economic and political affairs. Remember, I'm on X at Phumlani Majosi. I'm on Facebook, Phumlani Majosi. That's my Facebook page. I'm on LinkedIn, Phumlani Majosi. I'm on TikTok, it's Phumlani Majosi. I'm on Instagram, it's Phumlani Majosi. Remember to get yourself a copy of my book, Lessons from Past Heroes, a book that argues for a pro-market economy, stronger families, stronger law and order. That is how we can build a competitive, a globally competitive South Africa, available at a bookstore near you, or you can order on amazon.co.za or on Take a Lot. Ernst van Zyl is here with me today. He's back. He's the head of public relations at AfriForum. Mr. van Zyl, how are you, sir? All
Good
good.
morning, Phumlani. Great to be back. You've been doing some fantastic content the past few weeks. I mean, the political temperatures out there are high, but
Yeah.
hopefully our conversation here can shed even more light on some of the topics and terms and ideas that are floating out there. I think it's a valuable discussion to have.
Awesome, my brother. Awesome. Thank you for coming back. I think our discussion last time was very much insightful. Let's talk about AfriForum and solidarity in
Mm.
the US. As we all do know, there is much noise about that, and we have submitted a memorandum there. Aaron's, I posted on X a
Mm.
few days ago where I was saying that I support everything you stand for in your memorandum, right? Because
Mm.
your first number one there in your memo is the background of the whole situation, why you are in the US, and what solidarity movement is. That's a good context. And then you speak about the solidarity movement stance on South Africa's relations with the USA. I'm with you there. I strongly believe that our foreign policy has been very much misguided, right? So, and then you give good recommendations. Um, yeah, well, then we speak about solidarity movements outreach to the USA, of course. And then number 3.2, Afrikaners in South Africa. I think that was a good summary. And but then on 3.2, and then you speak about, of course, expropriation, Bela, right, racial laws, all those things. We are all on the same, position. In fact, in everything, we are in the same position. But there was one thing that I couldn't get, and I did post on X, as I've just said, where in your recommendations on the section on 3.2, Afrikaners in South Africa, in your recommendations, you say that in light of President Trump's executive order, we propose the first bullet point is Afrikaners' aspiration for a free, safe, and prosperous life and cultural autonomy at the southern tip of Africa be recognized, right? Now, I asked on X, are you talking about self-governance? Right. Does this mean that you, as Afrikaners, you want your own country, you want to self-rule, you want to secede from South Africa and govern yourselves? Explain that to us, right? Or to me. Yeah.
See, I was muted there for a moment. Thank you
Yeah,
very
you
much,
were.
Pumlani.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating question, and I think it warrants a discussion. So, when it comes to particularly autonomy, I'm not going to go into the political science side of this term. I'd
Yeah.
rather speak to your audience in regards to what this actually means in practice.
Exactly.
So,
For AfriForum.
what culture?
What do you mean? Yeah.
What does there's actually a perfect word for it in Afrikaans that there doesn't seem to exist an English word for it. It's called self-bestuur, but it doesn't directly translate to self-governance. It directly translates to something like self-management or in some way
Self-management.
being in control of your own destiny. And that is where cultural autonomy comes in for AfriForum. When you see the South African government attacking Afrikaners in particular, I mean, many minorities are under threat from the government, their rights, their cultures, their languages. But in particular, Afrikaners are one of the main targets, the Afrikaner culture of the South African government's policies. And what our stance is in regards to autonomy is particularly a reaction to what is the government targeting when it targets Afrikaners and Afrikaans. Well, it's targeting our cultural institutions, it's targeting our language, it's targeting our right to have a say about what the future for our culture looks like. And what cultural autonomy at the end of the day boils down to, in very simple terms, is having the destiny of your culture or your community's future in your own hands. How does that look in pragmatic terms, in practice? Well, it looks like what AfriForum is doing, where, for example, you don't depend on the government to preserve your heritage or your language. You do it yourself. You don't depend on the government to promote your culture or your language or to look after it. You do it yourself because then it's in your own hands. You're not government dependent in regards to basic services like water, electricity, cleanup, safety. All of these things AfriForum is striving to become increasingly state-proof, as we call it. So that's also another way of taking control of your future, of your destiny, taking it into your own hands. And that is what AfriForum not only wants for Afrikaners, but for every community in this country, for every culture in this country, that they can wean themselves off government dependence and gain more autonomy in regards to being able to have a much larger say in the direction that the future is going, in particular relevant to their own culture. A good example of cultural autonomy would be the Swiss canton system. In Switzerland, there's a canton system, a federal system, which gives a substantial voice to every single cultural and linguistic minority in that country to have a say about where and to have a lot of influence over the direction of policy and in regards to what the future for their culture and their language looks like. This whole idea of federalism is nothing radical. It's nothing strange. It's just the fact that you take a lot more, and this is why the government hates this idea. You take power and control away from the state and you put it in the hands of communities who know best what they want for their future and what issues directly that most affect them. I mean, a good example would be how the South African government has treated issues that particularly affect minorities in this country. Whenever minority groups in this country say our language is under threat, the issues that are affecting us are being ignored, the government ignores those calls. They don't engage in dialogue. They don't engage with those communities to find a solution. They just ignore them and pretty much send them the message, you are a minority, therefore, or you are a minority group, therefore your issues are not going to be put on the table for discussion. They give them arrogantly give them a cold shoulder. And that is the very opposite of having increased autonomy as a community or as a culture. So that's what AfriForum wants, is in reaction to a government that has shown that it has no desire to give minority groups in any community really in this country the voice that they deserve, to voice their concerns, to be part of the solution to the problems that affect them in a unique way. Then in that case, AfriForum says, well, if the government is failing in that responsibility, those communities should be given a more autonomy to solve their own problems, as AfriForum has done in a very pragmatic fashion.
Now, let's talk in South Africa as it is right now.
Mm.
So we do have the state at the top that is in control of everything, right? In every province across the country. If you were to implement your ideas that you are pushing for, how would it look like? What would you do if you were to change this system that we have right now? Does
Right.
that mean no South Africa, or what does it mean?
Well, it means that basically it means what you already are seeing in regards to what AfriForum is doing. So we're already fighting and building for increased autonomy for communities. We do this. Let's take, for example, education. We are increasing autonomy for cultural influence in matters of education through, for example, the building of our own educational institutions like Soltech and academia. Also through security. So when a community is 100% dependent on the state for its security and fighting against crime, and that state fails to fight crime effectively, then that community has zero autonomy. So therefore, AfriForum gives communities the tools to be able to handle their own security and safety in conjunction with the government. It's not an anti-state movement. We're not trying to destroy the government or not work with the government in any way. In regards to security and safety, our neighborhood watches and neighborhood patrols all across the country work very well with police services and police stations on the ground. So that would be security autonomy. Then you also have, for example, what the AfriForum branches do in regards to doing a lot of the services that the government should be doing, but just fail to do. Now, a state of no autonomy would mean that those communities are just left to wallow in tragedy and dysfunction because the government is not fulfilling its responsibilities. But increasing autonomy for those communities would mean giving them the tools and giving them the ability to do a lot of these services themselves that the government is failing, which AfriForum is already doing. Last year, we established our first private firefighting unit. We've established private emergency services. We have our neighborhood watches, of course. We also help maintain infrastructure. We fill potholes, we plant trees, we clean up streets and towns. We do all the things the government should be doing. That's also another form of self-bestuur, growing autonomy for communities. And at the end of the day, all these examples, I mean, there's a lot more examples, but they all boil down to one thing, and that is equipping communities to firstly have a stronger voice in regards to the issues that affect them in particular, and secondly, giving them the tools and equipping them to actually address these issues when the government fails to address these issues. So it's not an approach of now breaking up South Africa. It is simply an approach of giving the communities in South Africa, let down by the government, the tools to be able to actually solve the problems that affect them themselves when they deal with a government that is either apathetic or unable to solve the problems that they face on a daily basis. And AfriForum's approach is to increasingly do that, to grant increasing capabilities to communities to solve these problems that affect them, that the government has been just giving a cold shoulder and a blind eye to for many years. So that's, I think, the best way to sum it up. How does it look in practice? What are we building towards? I mean, that's it. It comes down to that term of state proofing your community. And what everything AfriForum is doing is open source. So anyone that wants to do that for their own community, whether that be a Zulu community or a Chonga community or a Venda community or just a overall cosmopolitan community, if they want to emulate the AfriForum model, they can schedule a meeting with us and we will gladly meet with them and give them the blueprint on how we achieve what we achieve. Because at the end of the day, what we are achieving for our communities all across the country, we want to see achieved for all communities in South Africa. We want a South Africa that is less dependent on a failing state rather than more dependent as the ANC want.
So you're saying that you would kill the provincial government, right? And rather bring it down straight to communities. That's what we are saying. That's
Well, not kill,
much
rather
of
expand. So what you're doing is you add an extra layer to it so that there's still a place for provincial government. We don't want to abolish the provincial government. We
yeah.
just add another layer, which is one step lower, closer to the ground level, and that is the communal level where you have communities taking up an increasing amount of responsibilities for solving a lot of these problems. Doesn't mean that then there's no use for the provincial government. The provincial government also has a place, and there will be cooperation between this community sphere and the provincial government sphere, just as there is cooperation between the communities with all the entities of government that they encounter on a community level, like police stations and municipalities.
Yeah. Now, in your
So it's a
documentary,
supplementary level rather than a replacing level.
okay, all right. So in your documentary, and that you've done around this thing of devolution of powers, right? The title of the documentary is
Self-bestuur, which is a more accurate term. Yeah, it's self-management. Yeah, self-bestuur.
self-management. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So in your documentary, which is a very good documentary,
Thank you.
you visit Italy, right? And there is this community or cultural group is it South Tyrol or South Tyrol?
Yes, it's
And
yeah.
so when I looked at them, some of the speakers you have in your documentary, one of the things that one of the speakers mentions is that there is a lot of power they have, in terms of whether it's around taxes as well,
Mm.
security, and many other things that they have as a community that they are in control of. But then at a national level, you have things like the army, the police, and the
Mm.
international contracts with the EU and all, excuse me, and all of that. Um, Tell us about that South
Mm.
Tyrol model, and it's in a documentary, and we are saying it
Yeah.
could be a good model that we could adopt in South Africa. Tell us more about that.
Mm. It's a fascinating case study. So, South Tyrol is a province of Italy where there is a majority German-speaking minority that lives there, a very small minority in the bigger picture of Italy. But they are a majority in that part of the country, and they have been throughout their history. They've been threatened by the state in many ways. Their autonomy has been violated by the state in many ways. I mean, there was a time when well, firstly, after under Mussolini, the fascist Italian regime, the South Tyroleans were forced to change their names from German names to Italian names. It was made illegal to teach children in German as a language. They had to be taught in Italian. They had to have like secret education meetings where they educate their children in their mother tongue in secret, away from where the state could arrest them for it. There was and Street names were changed, town names were changed. It was a project of Italianization by the Italian government at the time, a tyrannical move. And these Germans then, at the end, fought for their autonomy and they won. And over many years of lobbying and pressure on the government, they were granted increased levels of autonomy to the point where they now have a lot of control over their education system. They have a lot of, in that particular area in Italy, they can choose the language of instruction there. They have increased control over how the taxes are spent in that area where they live. They have control over street names, cultural policies, heritage-related policies. They have increased autonomy. And this is, again, as I said, in response to a very aggressive policy from the ruling party or from the ruling regime over in the past that tried to wipe out their culture and tried to Italianize their culture and in the end rob them of any form of autonomy. And they then responded by lobbying and putting pressure on the government for increased autonomy, increased say, as I said earlier, increased say over the direction of their community's future and having a say in policies that affect them directly, like, for example, educational policies, like what language my children is taught in. And there's a lot of parallels between that and what's happening in South Africa, where the government is aggressively marginalizing Afrikaans education in favor of English education, attacking Afrikaans education, particularly through destructive policies like the Bella Act, targeting minority heritage and minority culture through, firstly, the antagonistic rhetoric and villainizing and blaming and scapegoating minorities for every problem that they caused, the South African government has caused. And it's that type of environment where minority communities then say, well, we clearly don't have a say in our future as a community. We are being existentially threatened, the future of our culture and our language. Therefore, we will fight for a stronger say and stronger influence over the direction of the future of our community. And that's what the South Tyroleans did to a great success. And now they are one of the richest provinces in Italy, one of the greatest contributors to Italy as a whole, the country. They didn't, through gaining autonomy, damage Italy or destroy the Italian government or do damage to the average Italian's well-being in Italy. They're actually one of the greatest contributors now to the bigger picture in Italy because they were granted more freedom and more opportunity to have a say about matters that concern them in particular, and because they are no longer being targeted by the state with policies that threaten the future of their community. So that's why I thought to make a documentary over self-bestuur, self-management, over increased cultural autonomy, I have to go talk to the South Tyroleans because they've done it right.
Yeah, yeah. And why do you think the ANC wants to have full control of the country, right?
Mm,
And not decentralize the state? Because the ANC is
mm,
they want this centralized state to
mm,
take care of everything. You know, there's one person who responded to one of my ex posts in the last few days. when I was saying, look, even the Zulus, the Tswanas, they should preserve their culture and
Mm.
advance it in the fields of science and build institutions
Mm.
that advance their language and culture. And this person said, Arends, isn't that what was being done during the apartheid era, right? In other words, this they were saying these silos or this thing of segregating one another. In other words, we should have
Mm.
one big bureaucracy controlled by the state and instructing us to use the English or whatever language in their point
Yeah.
of view, right? Have one big bureaucracy, kill the culture, kill the languages, cultural practices, and pursue a big central state that
Mm.
imposes even the language we should
Mm.
speak. Why does the ANC love this centralized way of governance?
Hmm. Because this person that made that comment to you and the ANC are both the same thing. They're both radical statists. And in the mind of a radical statist, you can have no alternate centers of power. The state should have ultimate power. It should have ultimate say and power over every facet of society. That's what they believe. I mean, that is what is stipulated by the National Democratic Revolution idea. The NDR says that the South African government, the state, should continuously garner and centralize as much power in its own hands as possible and not allow any form of dissent or any form of resistance to that power. The state should have absolute power over every facet of society. That's their ideology. That's what they. I always challenge people to name me one example in the past 30 years of the ANC giving up a form of power in for the government, saying we're going to decentralize this or we're going to give up this power that the government has. It has happened, but it has only happened involuntarily, where the state is forced to give up that power. They have never voluntarily given up power in any way. It's always been an accumulation of power. It's always been more power being grabbed. It's never been, we're going to decentralize this power down to a community level or to a lower level or to a provincial level. It's always been increasing centralization because they're driven by the NDR, by the National Democratic Revolution, which stipulates that under no circumstances can you give up power as a state. You should always be ensuring you are building towards ultimate power for the government. So what you're describing there, Phumlani, is you're just dealing with radical statists that don't believe in any plurality of power or balance, checks and balances. They believe the government should have the ultimate and last say in every matter of our lives, and it's a genuinely evil way to look at the world. It's one of the views that has led to some of the most worst atrocities in human history, and they're just blind to it, or they pretend to not know history. Maybe they are just ignorant. They don't seem to read all that much. These people pushing these ideas, so I don't blame them for being ignorant, but they are pushing an evil ideology that has caused immense suffering and destruction in the past, and they are either naive or willfully ignorant.
And the thing is, Arends, for some reason, what they are pushing, um, it's got to do with less confidence, in my view. When you have less confidence
Hmm.
in your culture, in yourself, and for some, there's always this talk that, well, Phumlani Majosi has been colonized. He's got a colonized mind. He wants to impress white people. Why would I be impressing white people when I'm pushing that, blacks must start their own corporate companies? They
Hmm.
must advance their culture. They must advance their language in science world. Be proud of your culture, right?
Hmm.
And protect it, preserve it, right? In every way you can. Don't
Yeah,
let.
what you're advocating is the foundation for a healthy self-respect.
Absolutely. You see. So then here's a person who comes and say, well, you are being colonized. You still have a no. They have a colonized mind,
Hmm.
Arends, right? Because for them, this thing of some Karl Marx way of governance and this idea that we should have one language and one, you know, um, way of doing things as per the state. That's more like a way of being colonized. Not
Hmm.
me, not me, right? So I mean, how do you compare me? How do you say I'm colonized when I'm pushing that
Hmm.
you should have more self? management, which is what your
Mm.
documentary advocates
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, you should have a stronger, and that goes for any community in this country. The road
Of
to
course, yeah.
increased self-respect is going down the road of increased responsibility. Increased taking of responsibility is the root of self-respect. That's why supporters of AfriForum have so much healthy self-respect, because they can see their communities taking back responsibility from the state, not being state dependents. And that's why this whole idea from the ANC of celebrating the amount of South Africans on welfare grants from the state is so evil, because it makes people dependent on the state. It takes away their ability to take responsibility for themselves, and it makes them state dependent. It puts them in a position where they are so dependent on the state that the state can threaten them and say, if you don't do what I say, or you don't follow me on this, then I will cut off your financial aid that is keeping you alive in many cases. That's how evil this ideology of the ANC is. They celebrate the fact that the majority of South Africans are dependent on some form of government grant. That's nothing to celebrate. That is subjugation to the state through dependence. That is what they're doing here. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they know the more people that are dependent on their welfare industrial complex, the more people they have control over, the more people they rob of autonomy, the more people
Mm,
they rob of the freedom to be able to make decisions for themselves and to make decisions, particularly taking their destiny into their own hands. It's subjugation, and that is what the ANC is pushing. They know what they're doing, they're not ignorant. They might be malicious and often evil with a lot of their policies, but they're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing through these dependency policies, and AfriForum's reaction is completely the opposite. Our reaction is, let's become less dependent on the state. And Afrikaners have been, over the years, especially in the 20th century, we became deeply dependent on the state. And that led to a lot of problems in the 20th century, 21st century. The Afrikaners had regained our self-respect in the 21st century exactly through becoming more self-reliant in regards to the things that we were dependent on the state before. And that's, as I said earlier, that's a recipe for self-respect, taking up responsibility. A lot of politicians today discourage people and say you shouldn't be taking responsibility for anything. All these responsibilities should be handled by the state. Well, that is a recipe for an inferiority complex, the belief that you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. The state has to do everything because you're useless. That's the type of view that is bred by the state dependency ideology. It's genuinely evil.
yeah, yeah. And then, but you see, the thing is, Aaron, I also feel in my observation, that our people in the country, the majority of them, I don't think they are educated enough on these things, right? In the
Mm,
sense of understanding what the dangers of a centralized state is, how the devolution of powers is better than the centralized way of governance. I don't think they are educated. They understand these things very well, and that they've read the history. Which is why, if I were writing your memo last week to the White House, I would have never used the words like cultural autonomy in this at the southern tip of Africa, because I mean, for some people, they would think that, well, oh, they mean they want to go because they've accused you of wanting to go. You want to start your own thing, right? And block black people out of entering that, which is not what we are advocating at all. And then there's also this one thing. So I would have rephrased that if I were me.
mhm,
And then there's this, Aaron's. In my observation, the ANC has managed to, over the past 30 years, right? Well, in the build up to the end of apartheid and after the apartheid years, right? The ANC managed to, Aaron's, to create some narrative about I don't want to use the word brainwash because brainwash
mhm,
it would mean that maybe I don't take our people seriously, something like that. But the ANC managed to create a certain narrative about the state, that the state
mhm,
is somehow the best way of governance, right? If we pursue the state, It means that now we've gone over the apartheid way of governance. It's a form of unity. They've created this
Mm,
narrative about the state that is so somehow noble, great
mm,
social justice. It's a way we should do things. The state is somehow a holy entity that will
mm.
take us to
An
prosperity.
unquestionable entity, and if you
Exactly.
criticize the state, that's treasonous.
Absolutely. They've managed to do that, Arends. And they've done it, I would argue, so well. Because we have so many people
Mm,
who believe in these things, without even reading the history, the political history,
mm,
with less, um, education or understanding as to what exactly are the dangers of a centralized state. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that? That
mm.
the ANC has managed to monopolize the whole
Mm.
narrative about how South Africa should be governed.
Right, right. So, firstly, just a point there. I understand your constructive criticism in regards to putting cultural autonomy in the memorandum that we handed over to the Trump administration. But at the end of the day, I mean, what AfriForum was saying to the Trump administration was always going to be maliciously twisted by the ANC. And
Yeah.
increased cultural autonomy has always been one of our key values, even though it is a term that not everyone understands, because of course the government is not going to add the tools of your emancipation into the education system or into the education curriculum. Of course, they're not going to be teaching children in schools about what cultural autonomy actually means and how it's a good thing. But at the same time, the Trump administration and anyone serious about politics and political theory knows exactly what cultural autonomy means. So when you put it into a document intended not exclusively for the general public, but also for those that are in government that know what these terminologies mean, it's very critical. So I think that's why it is in there. In regards to particularly what we see with the ANC's grip on the minds of people um, in regards to the state dependency. I think the most effect, I mean, the ANC is weakened, but we saw for the last month, once again, it is still in control of an incredibly powerful propaganda machine that it has used for the past 30 years very effectively. I will give them that. They can't keep the lights on, but they can propagandize people. They do that very well. So when it comes to particularly this propaganda that they've spread, the most vicious or effective piece of propaganda, the most nefarious and sinister piece, has been this propaganda that the ANC and South Africa are the same thing, and then
Mm.
also that the government and South Africa are the same thing. So when you criticize the government, you criticize South Africa. When you criticize the ANC, you criticize South Africa. That has been a very effective sleight of
Yes, you
hand
commit
magic that
treason.
they've done. Excuse me?
Treason, treasonist. Crazy.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean it's very effective. If your entire mission, as we discussed earlier, is to centralize absolute power in the state and make the state a holy, sacred entity, then of course you're going to make it's almost like a blasphemy law that you're not allowed to say anything negative about the government or tell any uncomfortable truths about the government's policies and what they are doing, because that would be blasphemous against this new god that they're creating called the state. And that's exactly what they scream about: disinformation and treason. But I mean, that is them reacting through their propaganda machine to enforce this narrative that you
Mm.
can't criticize the government because then you are
Yeah.
criticizing the citizens of South Africa for some reason, and you
Yeah.
cannot take on the destructive policies of the ANC because then you are attacking, in their words, the
Yes.
citizens of South Africa. It has
Yes.
unfortunately been a very effective narrative, but it is starting to show cracks. It is not as effective as it was
As it
maybe
was.
at the
Yeah.
beginning of this whole political episode. They've overplayed their hand. Just as with empty accusations of racism have lost their meaning due to overuse, empty accusations of quote unquote disinformation and treason are also
Yeah.
losing their punch.
Yeah.
And that's significantly weakening their ability to push this narrative. But it's still a
Mm.
very strong narrative, and we need to be pushing back against it from all angles in
From
regards
all
to
angles. Yeah.
no, this grand story that the ANC and South Africa are the same thing, that the government and South Africa are the same thing. There's total nonsense, and you are being propagandized by people with an interest to maintain this vision or this narrative and this image of those things being the same because it serves their own purposes. And we need to be breaking down that myth. We need to be
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
enlightening people in regards to what's going on here.
Yeah, quick one, Aaron's. We have
Mm,
exactly 3 minutes, so
mm,
keep it very, very short. In terms of politics, in your documentary, you do have Helen Zille, the leader
yes.
of the DA and the former premier of the Western Cape. This
Mm,
thing of the devolution of powers, right, straight down to communities and so on. Helen Zille is in support of it, but in politics, do you have any hope that we could see a political revolution in politics that
mm,
pushes for this idea? But it seems like the ANC still dominates the narrative in
mm.
politics.
I'll keep the answer short because we're pressed for time.
Yeah.
There are some political parties and politicians out there that give lip service to the devolution of power, but there's been no political party that I've seen that have actually really pushed for it in practice. There have been here and there some examples, but not nearly enough or serious enough. That's why AfriForum exists. That's why the Solidarity Movement exists, because we realized we're not going to be achieving increased autonomy through the party politics system. We're going to do it through an alternative way to do it. That doesn't mean we tell our members to not go vote. They still go vote in high numbers, and they should be voting for those parties that support increased autonomy for communities in this country and support communities taking matters into their own hands in regard to their future. But at the same time, you should not be depending on politicians and political parties to do it because they simply have failed over the past 30 years to do it.
Aaron's, great to talk to you, sir. Thanks for
Thanks for
being
the
part of the
opportunity.
show again. Ernst van Zyl, he's the head of public relations at AfriForum. We're just talking about, how do we reform South Africa, right, into one where there's less centralized governance, into, giving more power to communities. His organization, AfriForum, has been pushing that for years, that the state is inefficient. Let us take self-management as
Mm,
people of South Africa. We must bring more of that political thinking in South Africa, and
mm.
stop the reliance on the state. Arends, thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity, Phumlani. Have a nice day.
Awesome. We'll chat soon.